Ben Shapiro's Objection 3. Jesus' resurrection must be a legend that was made by the first century Jewish followers of Jesus. If you want to check out the first two objections of Ben Shapiro, please check out my description. I will add the link over there. Now, this is what he says as his Objection 3.
So one of the counterclaims to some of this is that the Gospels are written significantly after Jesus lives. Even the earliest Gospel is written, 70 CE? Somewhere 40 years after Jesus is crucified. So what's to say, that like most historical events, there is some play in the joints here. So that this would be the historical argument against the exact veracity of the Gospel revelations.
One of the counterclaims is that Gospels are written significantly after Jesus lived. The earliest Gospel is written 70 CE, somewhere 40 years after Jesus is crucified. Ben Shapiro's objection here is quite nuanced, so let's unpack it. He questions the timeline of writing the Gospels. They were written significantly after Jesus lived. Now he suspects the memory of the apostles. Since they were written significantly later, they must have forgotten the details, or they must have come up with some details that were not actually true. And he doubts the method of gospel transmission. In the process of transmission, they might have added details. It's just 40 years past, you see. And then he assumes that the resurrection must be a legend developed over time. He implies that. Immediately, Dr. William Lane Craig, he pointed out that that is not the case.
In order for a historical document to be reliable, it isn't required that it be inerrant.
Contemporaneous, of course.
So let's unpack Shapiro's statement, his third objection, under these 3 points. Were all the 4 Gospels written after 40 years? Would he apply the same logic consistently to other Jewish writings? Did the belief in resurrection of Jesus slowly evolve among the followers of Jesus? I want to show you a sample legend from the ancient times and the reporting of the Gospel side by side so that we can see how legends differ in their details. Let's go on to this first point. Were all 4 Gospels written after 40 years of Jesus' life? This is what he says. The earliest Gospel is written around 70 CE, somewhere 40 years after Jesus is crucified. The first thing to note is that the Gospels were not written much after Jesus' crucifixion. Mark was written around AD 40. Luke and Matthew must have composed their Gospels around AD 50. And John must have written his Gospel around AD 60. So all 4 Gospels were written before AD 60. But the earliest Gospel of Mark, was written around AD 40. So between the events of resurrection and its recording in the Gospel of Mark, the first written Gospel, the gap could be just merely 10 years. And we could even go further back. The traditions that Paul recorded in 1 Corinthians 15 could have been the earliest one to be close to less than 5 years after the resurrection of Jesus. The timeline that Ben Shapiro establishes for all the Gospels as they were written around 70 CE is simply inaccurate. We have solid reasons to establish the timeline as close to 5 years after the resurrection of Jesus. So in the historical context, you see, this is extraordinary to have reports coming down to such a short time range. This is the first thing to note. Moving on to the second one, would Ben Shapiro apply the same logic on other Jewish writings? So we see Ben Shapiro questions the memory of the apostles and the method of transmission of the Gospels account within a few decades. Just even if you grant him all the Gospels were written around 70 CE, it's just a matter of 4 decades. He implies with suspicion that the apostles and the early eyewitnesses, they could have all made it up in this 40 years gap. Now let's think for a moment. He applied the same logic of a faulty memory and possibility of interpolation to the rabbinic sources that he might hold as authoritative as a conservative Jew, that the oral law was revealed along with the written law on the Mount Sinai. Torah was revealed to Moses and recorded, let's say roughly around 1500 BC. The oral Torah was passed on through generations for 17 centuries. And finally, the oral Torah was codified into what is known as Mishnah. Only in the year 280, Rabbi Judah Hanasi, after the fall of Jerusalem to the Romans and the destruction of the Second Temple, codified this oral law into written form. Think about 1,700 years gap. Yet Ben Shapiro wouldn't take issue with the memory of the rabbinic tradition or even question the possibility of interpolations. Ben Shapiro, as a conservative Jew, might hold that Mishnah, the oral Torah, oral law, as truly authoritative, perhaps equal to Torah, the written law. Would he apply the significantly after comment in this case? And since they were written truly after 1,700 years, I doubt it. Let's move on to clarify the third point. Did the belief in Jesus' resurrection among early Christians slowly evolve? Or is it possible that the belief in the resurrection of Jesus was a legend created and invented by the apostles, the Jewish followers of Jesus Christ? Now, at the end of his quote, he says, especially when you're talking about events 2,000 years ago, then he kind of leaves it to our imagination. Shapiro assumes that the belief in the resurrection of Jesus gradually gained acceptance among Jesus' early followers. The apostles in the early church composed probably divine narratives and attached them to Jesus. They devised a secret plan to deceive everyone, probably. Let's take a look how that meeting must have looked like.
Are we all here? I need 100% participation for this to work.
Yeah, everyone's here. All 12. 11. 11 of us. Well, what's the plan?
Well, as you know, Jesus is dead. But stick with me, okay? Stick with me. I have a plan. We are going to steal his body.
Okay, I'm tracking with you. What's next?
And then we're going to tell the whole world that he rose from the dead.
Oh, you know I'm in.
I love it already.
All right, classic. Then what?
And then we're all going to get brutally murdered.
Wait, come again. Could you go over that last part real quick?
Oh, what? We get murdered. What's the problem?
I like it. I like it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Pete. I love me a good hoax as much as the next guy, right? What's in it for us? Do we all get riches, fame, and fortune first, right?
No, get this. You're going to be hated, persecuted, and reviled for the rest of your life.
Okay, guys. Okay, and then what?
Then we all get killed. Come on.
When do we see ourselves become exalted and praised?
That's just it. You don't!
Hear what I'm saying? This is the most idiotic plan of all time!
Chill out, bro. I mean, do I really have to explain the joke to you? Look, it's that we lie about Jesus' resurrection, and then we all die.
How am I supposed to chill out when our heads are getting cut off?
But thankfully, that is not the case. I have a video titled Resurrection of Christ, Did Jesus' Followers Invent It? I invite you to check it out. I discuss 7 reasons why such a thing is unlikely. I will add the link for your reference in the description below. Now think about the timeline. Jesus was crucified around Passover and buried in the rock-cut tomb. Jesus' disciples began to experience the appearance of Jesus 3 days afterwards. Jesus appeared to them for 40 days at various times. They touched him, talked with him, and ate with him. He even appeared to 500 people. Then he ascended into heaven. The apostles waited for a week in Jerusalem after Jesus ascended. And then we see Peter standing up with other disciples, preached before the Jews on the day of Pentecost that Jesus is resurrected. So between the Passover, the meal, the Last Supper that Jesus had with the disciples, and the preaching of Peter on the day of Pentecost, there are only a gap of 7 weeks. Out of these 50 days, 40 days Jesus was with them, and 7 days they stayed in Jerusalem waiting for the coming of the Holy Spirit. So This is to say that the belief among early Christians about the resurrection of Jesus was instantaneous and core to their doctrine since the very beginning of Christianity. There is no slow evolution. We don't see any gradual evolution in the belief of Jesus' resurrection. Since Ben Shapiro thinks that the resurrection of Jesus must be a legend invented by the Jewish followers of Jesus Christ, I want to show a sample legend from the Gospel of Peter, a book that was written much after and not included in the Bible. See, legends take time to develop, and legends did develop around the resurrection of Jesus hundreds of years after Jesus crucified and resurrected. But the early church rejected those legends and kept the simple core version of resurrection as mentioned in the Gospels. I would like to show you one later legend of resurrection, and let's see how it differs from the account that we see in the Gospels. In the year 1886, a 7th century copy of a Gospel of Peter was discovered in Egypt. It is apocryphal writing, written probably around 2nd or 3rd century. It is not accepted as authoritative by the early church, so it is not included in the Bible. It has many fancy legendary details about the resurrection account of Jesus. Let's take a look at the legend of resurrection as mentioned in this apocryphal gospel. But in the night in which the Lord's day dawned, when the soldiers were safeguarding it, 2 by 2 in every watch, there was a loud voice in heaven, and they saw that the heavens were opened, and that 2 males who had much radiance had come down from there and come near the sepulchre. But the stone which had been thrust against the door, having rolled by itself, went a distance off the side. The sepulchre opened, and both the young men entered in. And so those soldiers, having seen, awakened the centurion and the elders, for they too were present, safeguarding. In 39, and while they were relating what they had seen, again they see 3 males who have come out from the sepulchre, with 2 supporting the other one. The cross was following them, and the head of the 2 reaching unto heaven, but that of the one being led out by a hand by them, going beyond the heavens. And they were hearing a voice from heavens saying, Have you made proclamation to the fallen asleep? And the obeisance was heard from the cross. Yes. The cross answered, Yes. And that's quite a graphic description of a legendary description of the account of resurrection. And see, this is the basic story. In Gospel of Peter, chapter 9, 35 to 10, 42, you will find this described. Jesus died and was buried in a cave-like structure. With the permission of Pilate, soldiers guard the tomb. 3rd day, a loud voice rings out in the heaven. And then, before everyone, the sky opens and 2 men descend in brightness to the tomb, to the sepulchre. The stone rolls by itself. The two men enters into the tomb. The soldiers watch it and wake up the elders and tell them what's going on. Now they all see not 2, but 3 men coming out. The 2 from the sky that are supporting another one, a 3rd one. That is Jesus. A cross is following them. The 2 of them grew so tall that their heads reach all the way to the sky. And the head of the 3rd one, that is Jesus, and the head of the 3rd one they are supporting is higher. It reaches beyond the heavens. And then they hear a voice coming from the sky. Have you spoken to those who are asleep? And the cross walking behind them responds to the voice that's coming from the sky, yes. This account is clearly legendary. A lot of details are added, and the events are exaggerated and blown out of proportion. Contrast this legend with the earliest report on Jesus' resurrection. If you read John chapter 20, verse 1 and 12, early on the 1st day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and other disciples, the one Jesus loved, and said, They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, they meaning the Jews, and we don't know where they have put him. Earliest reporting, what do we see? He was crucified, died, and was buried. On the morning of the third day, the tomb was found to be empty, and the body of Jesus was missing. Jesus' disciples thought the Jews removed Jesus' body. That's what any reasonable person might think. But when Jesus began to appear to them, they were convinced of his resurrection and then began to proclaim it. See, this is not how legends look like. What we see is a straightforward details given by various eyewitness accounts. See, you don't have to take my word for it. Pinchas Lepide, a Jewish theologian, he authored more than 35 books during his lifetime. He had an extensive conversation with Christians and researched on biblical source material extensively. And he wrote a book in 1983 titled The Resurrection of Jesus, a Jewish Perspective. And in this book, he agreed with the core argument that Jesus' resurrection was true. Let's take a look at his quote. I accept the resurrection of Easter Sunday not as an invention of the community of disciples, but as a historical event. If the resurrection of Jesus from the dead on the Easter Sunday were a public event, which had been made known not only to the 530 Jewish witnesses, but to the entire population, all Jews would have become followers of Jesus. Why did he think so? Why did he come to this conclusion? And this is what he says. If the defeated and depressed group of disciples overnight could change into a victorious movement of faith based only on autosuggestion or self-deception without a fundamental faith experience, then this would be a much greater miracle than the resurrection itself. That's Pinchas Lepide. Ben Shapiro has to take these matters much more seriously and engage on it. Part to Ben Shapiro's objection that the gospel must have been, developed over a long period of time, a legendary collection started with apostles, but materials added down the line. Lepide would say this: according to all the New Testament reports, no human eye saw the resurrection itself. No human being was present, and none of the disciples asserted to have apprehended, let alone understood its manner and nature. How easy it would have been for them or their immediate successor to supplement this scandalous whole concatenation of events by fanciful embellishment. But precisely because none of the evangelists dare to improve upon or embellish this unseen resurrection, the total picture of the Gospels also gains in trustworthiness. So Pinchas Lepide came to the conclusion that the reporting, as we see in the Gospel about the resurrection of Jesus, it is without embellishment. So Ben Shapiro has to take these Jewish scholars seriously when he is engaging on the question whether the resurrection itself was a legend evolved over time. I really wish that he takes Pinchas Lepide seriously. We have attempted to clarify Ben Shapiro's suspicion that resurrection could have been the invention of a first century Jewish legend put together by the apostles and other followers of Jesus Christ, and that it must have evolved over time. To clarify Ben Shapiro's suspicion and this argument, this objection, we have showed different reasons. The first one, we have showed that the Gospels were written earlier than Ben claimed. Ben would doubt the Gospels because they were written 40 years later, but he would accept his Jewish books like Mishnah, the oral Torah that was written down 1,700 years afterwards as authoritative. See, the third point, we showed a legend is quite different from the simple reporting of resurrection found in the New Testament Gospels. All these convincingly prove that Jesus' resurrection was not the invention of the apostles, or it was not a legend invented by the Jewish followers of Jesus in the first century, but it is based on the historical event when God intervened and acted decisively in history, raising Jesus to life. Though these events took place 2,000 years ago, it continues to inspire us even today. In John chapter 11, 25 and 26, Jesus says this: I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. Whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? If you believe this, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:22, in Christ shall all be made alive, all those who believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, just like he was resurrected, shall be made alive. And that's the hope Christians have. What a glorious hope we have in the risen Lord. The resurrection becomes more realistic because we believe in the resurrected Lord. In the next video, we are going to look at the last objection of Ben Shapiro, perhaps the weakest objection of Ben Shapiro. Stay tuned and check it out as soon as it comes out. Thank you for staying so far. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I request you to please subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. God bless you.